Hey everyone, it's Ms. Cole, and I have a confession. Um, I've been teaching high school language arts for over 15 years, and I've never read Pride and Prejudice. And I haven't cheated and watched the movies either, any of them. I've decided uh, it's a pandemic. Uh, I've got some time in between semesters here. Let's have a go at it. So I've decided to share my experience reading Pride and Prejudice for the first time with you guys. And some of this is because I want to be able to show my students what it's like to read something for the first time. Because a lot of the times, when I'm sharing a book with them that we're reading as a class, it's a book that I read an awful lot. And so each time I come through it, I see something different. I notice something that I didn't notice before. I relate to it in a different way. And that's one of the reasons that I choose the books that I do, because I think that they offer that sort of rereadability. But it's a different experience to read something for the first time. And it's especially different when it's an influential work of literature. And that's one of the things that I've noticed as I have just started reading this. So far, I am this far into the book. So, not very far, but already I'm noticing things that are standing out to me because I'm familiar with the characters and with the story, and also things that I'm noticing because I'm not. And they're standing out to me. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. And it makes me think about other things. So I'll talk about that in just a minute. So, starting off, there's a bit about the author that I skipped. And I just started in with, it's really big. It's not huge. I read Stephen King's It, and that was like the biggest book I've ever read in my life. But I finally got through that one. I was very proud of myself. So if you've seen some of my other videos, you may be familiar with the fact that I actually use the first sentence of this in my lesson on beginnings and what they tell us about a story. So it's pretty familiar. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. So I really love that beginning, and it tells us a lot about what to expect from the story. Not just in terms of the plot, because story and plot are not the same thing, but also in terms of tone and style, also very important. And then we meet the Bennet family, first of all. And what I knew about them previous to reading this was that, Mrs. Bennet is silly, somewhat flighty, very concerned with gossip and, getting her daughters married. And that's the purpose there. But she's, shallow and superficial and not, doesn't really have a strong depth of character. And there's some discussion about how good or bad of a father Mr. Bennet is when he hasn't been effectively providing for his daughters. I'm curious about what is expected to happen to the estate when he dies. There is at this point the expectation that the girls, or at least some of them, hopefully all of them, will marry well and will be able to, be taken care of in that manner. But being familiar with some of the ways that entailment works, because obviously part of this is that the girls can't inherit. Otherwise, getting married would have a different context. They would be looking for different benefits from marriage than what I remember them looking for from what I know of the story. And I remember the first line of dialogue too. My dear Mr. Bennet, said his lady to him one day, have you heard that Netherfield Park is let at last? And I know from reading Agatha Christie that having a place to let means having it to rent. Now, this would have been a long-term rental, not just a year-to-year or month-to-month. It would have been for, a longer period than that. And so it's not quite the same as we think of renting in modern America. But it really hit me because I know that the character who's coming in is the rich Mr. Bingley, who's like, all of a sudden it's like, oh man, there's a rich guy moving to town, we've got 5 daughters. But it really hit me on reading that He doesn't own Netherfield. Netherfield is not his. It's not his property. And that becomes more important in a little bit. We find out that he is actually relatively new money. His father made the family fortune and he has inherited it as the only son. And he is looking for an estate to become the family property. A single man of a large fortune, 4,000 or 5,000 a year. What a fine thing for our girls, says the mother. And so this means that he is the money that his father was able to make is enough that he is able to live off the inheritance. So he is essentially, that's like the thing. He doesn't have to work. But the fact that his father earned this money meant that his father had a job. His father worked. Possibly. That's a guess on my part, in fairness. It's entirely possible that his father had some money, was able to live off it more meagerly, and was able to, through judicious investments, was able to increase that fortune. So I guess that's possible. One of the other things that I noticed was in this first chapter, they talk about the girls. So the parents introduce them through dialogue. And I already knew them pretty well. Jane, of course, being the ideal daughter. She is good and kind and pretty and not stupid, but, not as quick-witted as the next eldest daughter, Elizabeth, who's our protagonist. And Elizabeth being the quick-witted one, but also maybe a little bit, more prone to speak her mind when it would be more socially acceptable not to do so. But of course, that's, presented through the narrative as a positive trait. Sometimes it causes problems, but overall, this forthrightness is an admirable quality. And then I think we have Mary, and Mary is actually the one, through what I know of the story, that I identify with the most. The character that I would say that she's most similar to is actually Gaston, because one of the things that makes Gaston such an interesting villain is that he does everything right. He does everything that he's supposed to. He is strong, he is handsome, he is skilled, and he's the original Disney animated version does not make it clear that he's wealthy, but I think it's not too much of a stretch to make that guess. And so he does everything right, and yet this girl it's not enough. He does everything that he's supposed to. Everyone loves him except for the one girl that he wants. And I feel kind of the same way with Mary. She's smart. She's not unintelligent. She's not quick-witted like Lizzie. But she works very hard at becoming accomplished, at doing the things that are expected of her. She plays the piano, though not particularly well. She sings, though not particularly well. She is not a good conversationalist. She says things that are relevant to the discussion, but that nobody cares about. And she's not homely, but she's not a great beauty like the eldest, Jane. And I love her so much. I know what it's like to try really, really hard and have it not be enough. So I have a lot of sympathy for Mary, and I'm really going to be interested to see how she develops. And then the two youngest are Catherine, called Kitty, and Lydia. And I get those two confused. They're both, young and kind of flighty and giggly girls, and I get them confused. I think Lydia is the one who runs off with somebody later on. I think it's Lydia, but I'm not entirely certain. So the first chapter is conversation between Mr. Bennet and his wife. And I actually like her better than I thought I would. And I like him less because from what I remember or what I've been exposed to, he's sort of, she's flighty and very self-absorbed in what I remember from like memes and stuff, as well as the clips that I've seen and trailers. And he responds to this kind of snarkily, but the truth is that and she says, "You take delight in vexing me." He starts it at least as much as she does. And he provokes her and vexes her, and then, kind of rolls his eyes at her hysterics when he's the one who's like getting on her nerves in the first place, just to sort of, he's kind of a bully in a way. She wants him to go and visit the new young rich guy, Mr. Bingley, because it's okay for him to do that. They're both men of business or some such. And because it's not okay for the women to go and visit him because he's a single dude. So it's not okay. But he could do that. And she's flat out asking him to do that. Therefore you must visit him as soon as he comes. And he's like, he just flat out tells her no. He's like, well, why can't you go? She's like, why? Like, the only reason he's doing this is to get under her skin. He's an asshole. I mean, he just is. And the other thing is, and this is what I've heard in discussions and seen, fandom posts and stuff like that, as well as among teachers who have actually read the book. Is that he's not showing the appropriate concern for his daughters making a suitable match. Having someone, because if they, if he dies, they get nothing. I mean, they will fall so much in station. They won't be able to interact with their friends. They will have to go out and be maybe governesses. I mean, their options are so limited. I mean, it's really bad. And he's not taking that seriously. And the reason he's not taking this seriously is because he wants to poke fun at his wife. Like, dude, you are so fortunate that this is a romantic comedy, because it could just go so badly. So that's chapter 1. However, at the very beginning of chapter 2, the narrator tells us Mr. Bennet was among the earliest of those who waited on Mr. Bingley. He had always intended to visit him, though to the last always assuring his wife that he should not go. So again, he's just doing it to be a jerk to her. I mean, not like he's not abusive, I would suggest, although it could be borderline. We're still early in the book, but I don't think he's meant to be seen that way. But he's just mean. And again, it tells us he's one of the first people to go and visit, even though he's telling his wife he's not going to do it. But there is a consideration there. And the narrator tells us he'd always intended to go, like, even before she asked. But it's like when there's stuff around the house to do, or when you've got papers to grade, and then someone says, "Have you done the dishes yet?" And you're like, well, now I really don't want to do it. I mean, I didn't want to do it anyway, but I was going to do it, and now I don't want to. Or when you're like, you've brought papers home after school over Christmas break to grade. You get an email from a student, and they're like, "Have you graded my lesson set yet?" And you're just like, it's the 27th of December. Christmas was 2 days ago. I mean, granted, I can't go out and visit my family because we got the global pandemic going on, but we're not in school. I get to have a break. Please give me a break. And then you feel guilty because you want to do right. It's just bad. And so, yeah, I don't have a whole lot of, I'm not real keen on Mr. Bennet right now. Oh, and then, plus, like, he doesn't, like, after he goes and visits him, and he comes back, he doesn't tell her. Like, he pretends that he hasn't gone, and they have this conversation. It's not, like, he isn't even the one who brings it up. He doesn't tell her that day. It's not until, like, the next night that he finally gives up that he's actually gone to talk to him. And the wife is getting frustrated, and she says, "I'm so sick of Mr. Bingley." And he like pounces on this, and he says, "Oh gosh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Well, if I'd known you didn't like him, I wouldn't have gone to visit him. In fact, you know what? Let me see. No, No, he doesn't. I am imagining. Because he's been behaving like this, it put in my head. I said, you know what? I'll go back and tell him that we can't have anything to do with him, because that seems in character for him because he's such an ass. But no, he says, as I've actually already visited him and introduced myself, we're gonna have to get to know him. And she's like, oh, of course, they're all it just says the astonishment of the ladies was just what he wished. This is his plan all along, this jerk. And to some degree, I mean, it makes him feel important and appreciated because they're all squealing over something he's done. Like he's this great champion. All he's done is gone next door to talk to some dude, okay? Now, granted, next door, because, they have estates, is like 5 miles down the road, but they are to some degree neighbors. It's not that big a deal. But they all coo over him and tell him that he's wonderful. And his wife, even more than the daughters, he wants them to make a fuss over him. But I guarantee you, he's the sort. He's like, just go sit down. He pretends he doesn't like it, but he likes it. Ugh. And they're all trying to figure out, what kind of person Mr. Bingley is and what they can expect from him. Because all they really know is that he's young and he's rich. Which, I mean, is not nothing. He could be old and rich. That would be sad. We learn a little bit about Mr. Bingley because he comes and he returns the visit, which is, it's what you do. When somebody comes and visits you, then you have to go and visit them back. It's like the rule. But the narrator tells us that Mr. Bingley had entertained hopes of being admitted to a sight of young ladies because he's heard that this dude has 5 daughters. And he's like, so it tells us that, he kind of looking too. I mean, what's this going on? But he'd only met the father, and he only gets to talk to the dad while he's there. It's just it's a man thing. But the ladies were somewhat more fortunate, for they had the advantage of ascertaining from an upper window that he wore a blue coat and rode a black horse. So now they know ever so much more about him. So there's so much about what do you know? Have you heard from somebody? Da, da, da. And it is gossip, but it's not malicious at this point for the most part. Sometimes it gets a teeny bit catty, but it's not bad. Oh, and by the way, we're in like chapter 3 at this point. This is something else that I noticed, and it helps make the book move more quickly. Is that the chapters are like 2.5 freaking pages long. They're just like, oh, and we're in another chapter. And the thing is, I mean, it's pretty dense as far as text. There's no pictures. Sorry, Gaston. But it moves. It moves much more quickly than I anticipated. And it depends on what kind of story you like. I love a character-driven story. When there's like an adventure story and it's all plot. Not so much. Not so much. I like action stories, but I like action stories that are about the interaction between characters. If it's going to be like, fighty, all that stuff, that's fine. But the fight itself is not what interests me, especially in a book. It's really hard to write an interesting fight scene because almost always you know what's going to happen. You know who's going to win the fight. You know which characters are maybe possibly going to die, and you know which characters are like safe. Almost always. I will say that Game of Thrones got me early on, and at that point I was like, really? How much more I got to read in this part of the series? I think I read like a chapter 2 after that. I was like, yeah, I don't care anymore. So I'm also not well versed in Game of Thrones. All right, so. Oh, chapter 3. Chapter 3 is 1, 2, 3, 4.5 pages because it's the Netherfield Ball. Woo! Let me tell you, all kinds of stuff happens. So this is where before I get to that part. This is of course where Darcy and Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth first meet, which I'm familiar with. And I like. Mrs. Bennet says to her husband, I like her more than I thought I would. So far. If I can but see one of my daughters happily settled at Netherfield, said Mrs. Bennet to her husband. and all the others equally well married, I shall have nothing to wish for. I mean, freaking, granted, this is what's in her mind at the moment. I'm sure she might come up with other things that she wants to wish for. I think that's pretty well established. Like, she like, oh, but then, and let's be honest, then she gonna be wishing for grandbabies. Because she's that kind of lady. But also, I mean, she's not, I don't know. I don't know yet if I think that, and maybe it could go either way. Maybe we'll find out more later, whether she would be the sort of person to be like, all my daughters have really nice houses and we just have this one. Da, 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 da. I don't know, though, if she would be that person or if she truly would. Like, if she'd be like, they're all okay. I kind of feel like I'm leaning that way at this point, that she'd be like, they're all, I don't have to worry that they're going to be out on the street, or they're going to be like, or like that one of them is going to be unmarried and will just sort of take care of the other one's kids. 'Cause like, she ain't got anywhere else to go. I mean, she wants all of her daughters to, and not just settled, not just married mistress of Netherfield, happily settled. She wants them to have, someone who will not just take care of them, but that they will be loved. And I like her more than I thought I would from just what I knew before. There's going to be a ball, and one of their friends tells them that the reason that Mr. Bingley had to leave and he couldn't come to dinner with them was that he's going to get a bunch of people to come for a ball. And they're like, wow! And then they find out that he's going to bring 12 ladies and 7 gentlemen. And they're like, ooh, we don't like those numbers. But it turns out that instead of 12 ladies, he only brought 6 ladies, and 5 of them are his sisters. He's got 5 sisters. Holy smoke. So, I mean, apparently it's like him and 5 sisters. So he's like everything. There's a lot of pressure on poor Mr. Bingley, which I missed previously that, okay. I'm not sure how many sisters Mr. Bingley has. Because then, of course, all of this is, through the grapevine. When the party entered the assembly room, it consisted of only 5 altogether. Mr. Bingley, his 2 sisters, the husband of the eldest sister, and another young man. So, does that mean the 2 sisters are the only sisters that he has? Or does it mean his 2 sisters of the 5 that he has? Either way, with the eldest sister being married, that's some pressure off of him. But if he's the only son, that's still a fair amount of pressure of him from the family. So Mr. Bingley is pretty superficial, but a nice guy. We don't find out about Mr. Bingley and the house until the next chapter, I think. And then Mr. Bingley has brought a single guy friend. So everybody's like, oh, hey. But he was looked at with great admiration for about half the evening. And so there's been a lot of discussion about Mr. Darcy and the fact that he is cold. He doesn't want to talk to anybody. And I don't know. I mean, he's a guest. And as a guest, you have responsibilities. I mean, dude could have told his friend, no, I'm not coming. But if you say yes, you got to follow through. You don't have to do something. Just don't do it. Either say you're not going to come to the party. Like, don't tell your friend you'll come to their party and then be a jerk. Either tell them, look, I don't like being around people. I just really rather not. I like you and I don't want to spoil your party. Just say no, man. Just say no. Of course, he has to come because plot. He's like the other protagonist. So, although I don't think he really is, I think Elizabeth's our protagonist and he's just sort of like the male lead. Anyway, his host tells him that he ought to dance and he says no. And I'm just like, Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for Mr. Darcy. And he says, he's been asked to dance, I certainly shall not. You know how I detest it, unless I'm particularly acquainted with my partner. At such an assembly as this, it would be insupportable. Your sisters are engaged. Not that they're like engaged. He means they have dance partners already. So he's like, the only girls that I know are already dancing with somebody else. And I don't want to dance with anybody else. It would suck. Dude, you should have said, I'm not coming. Fuck. What? No, it's not okay. And Bingley's like, what? Everybody's great. The girls are pretty and they're nice. What's wrong? He doesn't go so far as to say what's wrong with you. He says there are so many pleasant girls, and several of them are uncommonly pretty. And Mr. Darcy says, you got the only one who looks any good. And, Mr. Bingley being just like, sort of kind of a himbo, I guess. He's like, she is the most divine creature that I have ever met in my entire life. Bless his little heart. I mean, oh boy. And he's like, her sister is sitting down just behind you, and she's really pretty, and I'm sure she's real nice. Let me ask, this girl to introduce you. And he turns around, looks at Elizabeth, and then turns back to Mr. Bingley and says, she's not ugly, but, she's not good looking enough that I want to dance with her. Like, how? How can you still be possessed of any wealth? Like, if you're that bad at social interactions, how do you do any sort of business? How do you maintain your investments? How do you keep your tenants happy if you have like property? How is he this socially ignorant, and not just ignorant, but socially unskilled, and still able to not have lost his fortune at this point? No. I mean, I guess I'm not supposed to pay any attention to that. The fact that business requires social interaction. And he's apparently really bad at it. And I can totally, like, there's nothing morally wrong with that, aside from the fact that he made a promise to his friend and did not follow through on it. Not cool, dude. So, and yeah, he says this. There's no indication that he lowers his voice, and he says this right in front of her. And like, he's lived in this sort of society. He has to know that this is rude and hurtful. Like, there's no excuse. He is deliberately being unkind. Not cool. But Elizabeth still has a good time because Mrs. Bennet had seen her eldest daughter, much admired by the Netherfield party. Mr. Bingley had danced with her twice. Everybody else got danced with once, but he picked Jane an extra time. And Jane was as much gratified this as her mother could be, though in a quieter way. She's not like, Mom was like, oh, he like her. And she's just like, maybe he likes me. And Elizabeth felt Jane's pleasure. So she is able to have a good time just because somebody appreciates her sister. And he seems to be a nice guy. So that's pretty cool. That makes me like Elizabeth. Mary had heard herself mentioned to Miss Bingley as the most accomplished girl in the neighborhood. So somebody said something nice about Mary. I like her too. Bless her little heart. And Catherine and Lydia always had somebody to dance with them. So yay. And which was all that they yet learned to care for at a ball. They get to dance. Yay! We get to wear a pretty dress, get to wear some jewelry and, pinch your cheeks so they look, cute, and do your hair and all that stuff. And then you get to go dancing, music. Yay! So, I like them too. So far I like everybody except Mr. Darcy. Because he's being a jerk and he is, he's making his friend's party less pleasant by his presence. Jeez, Darcy, just say no. But of course, then we wouldn't have the book because that's where they meet. And apparently, Mr. Bennet stayed home because I don't know why. I'm not entirely sure why. He didn't go. And with the book, he was regardless. So he tends to get caught up in books, but she goes on to say, the narrator goes on to say, on the present occasion, he had a good deal of curiosity as to the event of an evening, which had raised such splendid expectations, which is hilarious because he could have found out how it had gone if he'd gone. But did he? No, he didn't. He stayed home. And did we find out why he didn't go? I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to keep going because this is already pretty long and it's going to be even longer because I've still got 2 more chapters. Anyway, his wife starts talking as soon as she comes into the room. And which, like, he complains about this, but, like, he wanted to know. That's like part of why he stayed up. That's part of why he started reading the book. So that he would find out, well, how did it go? He wants to know, but he pretends that he doesn't want to know. He's as bad as she is. He's just like, and so blah, 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 blah. And he's like, he seems like so compassionate. And the husband says, if that dude had any compassion for me, he wouldn't have danced so much. Just you're telling me too much. I wish he'd stop telling me about his dance partners. I wish he'd sprained his ankle in the first dance. And she's like, and she keeps talking about this guy. And then she starts talking about what everybody is wearing. And he says he doesn't want to hear about that. And then so she starts talking about something else and talks about Mr. Darcy. I can assure you, she added, that Lizzie does not lose much by not suiting his fancy because he is a most disagreeable, horrid man, not at all worth pleasing. A little bit of mama bear coming out there. She's like, well, if he doesn't like my girl, then there must be something wrong with him. Let me tell you. So, not handsome enough to dance with. I wish you had been there, my dear, to have given him one of your set downs. I quite detest the man. Bless him. Oh my goodness. So funny. I like Mrs. Bennet a lot more than I had just from hearing people talk about her, just readers, as well as the clips that I've seen from the various movies and stuff. So chapter 4, Jane and Elizabeth are alone because I don't know why they're alone. They walk off together. I don't know. Maybe they share a room. But Jane opens up to Lizzie and she's like, he's just what you want a guy to be. He's sensible and fun, and he's nice, and he's easy to be around. He doesn't make me uncomfortable. He's not like, hey. And Lizzie comes back, yeah, and he's hot too. And which a young man ought likewise to be if he possibly can. His character is thereby complete. She's like, yeah, all that's important, but best of all, he's a hottie. and Jane says, I didn't think he would ask me to dance an extra time. He didn't ask anybody else to dance the second time. He asked me twice. I didn't think he was going to do that. And Lizzie says, you didn't think he would? I figured he would. So she says, that's a great difference between us. Compliments always take you by surprise, and me, never. She's like, I know I'm awesome. Why doesn't everybody else see it? So at this point, now I'm identifying with Lizzie. Because I'm just like, what? Yes, I am fabulous. Thank you. And she's like, yeah, he likes you, but like, that's not exactly a compliment to him. It just means he's not completely oblivious. So obviously he should like you. Elizabeth then gives us some expository detail about what a wonderfully nice person Jane is. And now this is interesting because a teacher friend of mine talked about the Bingley sisters and just how awful they are, but Jane seems to like them. And Lizzie doesn't, she says their manners are not equal to his. But of course, Bingley is supposed to be, just really not just well-mannered, but also just really friendly and, but not uncomfortably so. Just easy to get along with, and everybody likes him. So saying their manners are not equal to his, like, Apparently nobody else's are. Maybe Miss Perfect Jane. Maybe. But everybody else, no. Nobody holds a candle to Mr. Bingley. So we get some exposition about the Bingley sisters. They were, in fact, very fine ladies, not deficient in good humor when they were pleased, but they were proud and conceited. They were rather handsome, had been educated well, and had a fortune, were in the habit of spending more than they ought and of associating with people of rank, and were therefore in every respect entitled to think well of themselves and meanly of others. So they snobs. So we also have some math here, some number crunching to do. Mr. Bingley inherited property, we're not told what just yet, in the amount of nearly £100,000 from his father, who had intended to purchase an estate but did not live to do it. But then through the gossip, which again, it's gossip, and we found out with the number of guests that sometimes that's not always all that accurate. We were told £4,000 to £5,000 a year. So that's what he can afford to draw in interest without dipping into the principal, the actual amount of the overall property. So there's some kind of investment, but we don't know what, and it's not an estate because he wants to buy one. Mr. Bingley's pretty easygoing, and there is, the narrator tells us that there is some doubt that he's actually going to buy an estate because he's renting Netherfield, and it seems to like it there. So maybe he'll just, stay there and then, tell his son, hey, when you get a chance and you grow up and you inherit all my money, get a family estate so that we have one. I don't know. His sisters were very anxious for his having an estate of his own, because of course that's going to affect them, especially the younger one who is not married. But Mr. Bingley had not been of age 2 years when he was tempted by an accidental recommendation to look at Netherfield House. He did look at it and into it for half an hour, and then he's like, sure, I'll take it. So, not the most cautious individual, let's say. The manner in which they spoke of the group of people there was sufficiently characteristic, and we're contrasting Bingley and Darcy here. Mr. Bingley is like, hey, everybody's awesome. It's so much fun to be around. The girls are pretty. It was great. And Darcy's like, it sucked. There's no fashion here, little beauty. He wasn't interested in any of them. Miss Bennet, Jane, the perfect woman, he acknowledged to be pretty, but she smiled too much. Dude! Whatever. So in chapter 5, which is the last chapter I've read so far, so we're almost there. I'm sorry. If you've stuck it out with me for this long, I appreciate it. Thank you. So chapter 5, we meet the Lucases, who I think were mentioned earlier. So the father has been made a knight because he is wealthy and he had, I'm not entirely sure what it means here. He had risen to the honor of knighthood by an address to the king during his mayoralty. So maybe he was the mayor of a town and gave a speech and the king heard it and liked him and made him a knight. I'm not entirely sure what all that means. I don't know what a mayoralty is. There are some notes on some of the words, but I'm really not liking them in this book because they define some of the words which I already know. They didn't define this one. And the definitions are not particularly helpful. They used, let's see, on the next page, there was one before, blah, 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 blah. When it says that Mr. Bennet was among the earliest of those who waited on Mr. Bingley. You can get from the context that he went to visit him, but it says that it defines that one. I know what a fortnight is. It defines fortnight. I guess it's important to know that because the ball's going to be soon-ish, but that's not, knowing that isn't really vital to the story. And anyway, when Sir Lucas has become Sir Lucas, he decides that, he's rich and now he is literally entitled and he starts acting like it. And he's like, I am not a working man now. Now I am an aristocrat. And so he closes his business and sells his house and moves a mile outside of town because, he is now a knight and he has an estate. And unshackled by business, he occupied himself solely in being civil to all the world. So he's a snob, but he's a friendly snob. And the barbs in here are fun. His wife was a very good kind of woman, not too clever to be a valuable neighbor to Mrs. Bennet. A little bit of a zinger there. And so chapter 5, they're talking about, it's pretty short. They're talking about their opinions of what happened in chapter 4. So that helps us know that chapter 4 is important because not only do we see it happen, we also get like the replay. Which we also got the replay when Mrs. Bennet told Mr. Bennet what she thought. And now Mrs. Bennet and Lady Lucas are talking about what they think. So lots of talk. So the daughter, one of the daughters, it says they had several children. The eldest of them, a sensible, intelligent young woman, about 27, was Elizabeth's intimate friend. I don't know if we know how old Elizabeth is at this point. Not really sure. Anyway, so they're buddies. They're close friends. And Charlotte, the daughter, who is friends with Elizabeth, says, Mr. Darcy Kent sucks. Poor Elizabeth, just, you're tolerable. And I think it's the mom. It doesn't say. But I think that Mama Bear comes up and says, I beg you would not put it into Lizzie's head to be vexed by his ill treatment. For he is such a disagreeable man that it would be quite a misfortune to be liked by him. So, I'm liking Mrs. Bennet more and more. I mean, she gets some nice zingers there. He doesn't ever talk to anybody, and Jane very gently says, "Are you sure? Because I thought I saw him talk to somebody." And Mrs. Bennet says, "Yeah." She asked him how he liked it at Netherfield, and then he when somebody asks you a question directly. Apparently he knows that he can't be so rude as to just ignore it completely. So he knows at least that much. But apparently the woman said that he seemed angry at being spoken to, leave me alone. Yes, it's fine here. So whatever. The friend, Miss Lucas, says, I wish that he had danced with Elizabeth. And the mother says, well, I wouldn't dance with him if I were you. And Elizabeth says, I think I can promise you I never will. So we get that from Elizabeth. And then they start talking about, him being proud. And they think that the reason that he's so disagreeable is he thinks that because he is stupid rich, even richer than Mr. Bingley, I think. I think he's richer. And that he thinks he's just too good to talk with any of them, that he's looking down on them because they live out in the country and don't have as much money as he does. So they're making this assumption about him. Miss Lucas is kind of nice to him. She says, his pride doesn't offend me as much as pride often does because there's an excuse for it. He's just really, really, really rich. So, yeah. And Elizabeth just flat out says, that's true. I could forgive him his pride if he hadn't, taken a stab at mine. So screw him. And then Mary pipes in, pride is a very common failing, I believe. By all that I have ever read, I am convinced that it is very common indeed, that human nature is particularly prone to it, and that there are very few of us who do not cherish a feeling of self-complacency on the score of some quality or other, real or imaginary. Vanity and pride are different things, though the words are often used synonymously. So she just goes on about the definition of pride, which is tangentially relevant to the conversation, but it's not what anybody cares about. And again, I'm just Mary, oh, bless you. You're trying to participate. I love you. And you're not getting it right. I love you even more. No, Mary, I love you so much. She tries so hard to be good and to be the right kind of girl. Oh my God, Mary, I love you. And then one of the Lucas boys comes in and they start talking about, he's like, this is what I would do with my money. And they just talk in that ends chapter. So, I am very interested to see, I think the one I want to see more of the most is Mary. If I want to see if I continue to like her as much as I do now. I love her for trying, even when I feel like she can tell that because they don't ask her anything about what she says. They don't involve her in the conversation. And I'm curious to see how that develops. And the same thing with the parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bennet. I know a little bit more about Charlotte Lucas. I know that I know about the decision that she makes later. In case any of you are also, if you haven't read it, I don't want to give spoilers away, but I do know about the decision she makes, and I'm curious to see how that actually plays out in the book. And I'm curious to know how old Jane and Lizzie are, because I don't think we've found out yet. I want to say that the youngest of them are either 14 and 15 or 15 and 16. Like, they're pretty young. And then Mary's in the middle. So maybe Jane is 20, which puts Elizabeth at like 18 or 19. So she's almost 10 years younger than Charlotte. So the fact that they are close friends is really interesting. Now, part of that's going to be because, I mean, Charlotte's the only girl that she's like not related to who's like nearby and of a station that would be appropriate for them to interact on a regular basis. So it could just be that they ain't anybody else left. And also Charlotte seems to be pretty sharp. So, she and Elizabeth would probably have a similar sort of intellect. And if they had similar interests, I can kind of see that. Like if Elizabeth is 10 and Charlotte's 20, that puts them at like really different. They can't have been friends for like really long. I don't know. I'm just really interested in how they became friends. So I'm curious about that. And I don't know that we'll get to find out. Gosh, sorry, I went on for a bit, and I hope I've exhausted everything. If you have questions for me, I would love to hear them down in the comments. I'm going to try to do, I don't know, every 5 or so chapters and then another one. So if you're listening to this as a way to get out of reading the book, you're going to spend more time listening to this, and there's probably going to be stuff that you should have paid attention to in the book that I'm not going to talk about because it didn't interest me. So, if you're supposed to read the book for class or something, like use this maybe as a supplement, and you're welcome to ask me questions and stuff in the comments, but, just read the book. It's really not that hard. If you like books with lots of action, this is not the book for you, and I'm very sorry. But if you like interesting characters, you might like this book. Anyway, that's all that I can think of to say for right now. So I'm going to stop. And I hope you're having a wonderful day. And I hope you like this. I would love to have you as a subscriber. And please let me know what you think, because I am I go bonkers for feedback and comments. And I love talking to people about stories. Yay! Bye, everybody. Have a great day.